I used to pass his house in the early hours, when the sky still held the last pale ash of night. The place looked as if winter had never lifted from it, as if frost had settled into the wood and decided to stay. Paint peeled in thin curls like old petals. The porch sagged a little more each week, and the roofline bent with the fatigue of years. Wind pressed through the loose boards and sang a thin note, the kind you hear only when a place has more memories than voices. I would slow without meaning to, noticing the way the mailbox leaned, the way the path had surrendered to weeds. There was a heaviness there, a quiet that felt less like peace and more like forgetting. Even the morning birds skimmed past that yard, as though they knew better than to land where hope did not. He lived behind a curtain that never quite closed. I learned his rhythms the way you learn a standing clock. He was a retired factory man, small-shouldered and careful with his steps, always in the same grey sweater no matter the season. He would sit at the kitchen table by the window, hands wrapped around a mug that steamed less and less as the days grew warmer. Sometimes he adjusted a photo frame. Sometimes he stared at the places where rain had left brown veins along the ceiling. The house seemed to press its weight on him, and he carried it the way old trees carry snow. When he opened the door to collect a newspaper, he checked the porch boards before trusting them with his full weight. He moved like a man apologizing to the floor. What struck me most was not the decay but the hush that followed him. He walked as if sound itself might break. And when his eyes lifted toward the world, they held that dim shine of someone who has waited too long to be called by name. The neighborhood flowed around him like water around a stone, reshaping itself without ever touching him. I told myself he preferred the quiet, that some people simply dissolve into it. But there was a morning when I saw him attempt the step from porch to path and hesitate, a tremor of doubt running through his shoulders. In that single breath, I felt the weight of his years, and the house seemed to sigh again, as if it too was asking for help. It did not know how to ask. It was not the house that first called others to notice, but one woman. She lived across the street, the kind of neighbor who always knew the rhythm of the block, the sound of children on bikes, the laughter of weekend cookouts. Even the pauses that meant something had gone quiet. She had watched him longer than most, and unlike the rest of us, she did not let his silence excuse her own. One afternoon, she crossed the street with a basket of food, nothing more than bread, fruit, and a jar of soup. I saw her knock, wait, and then knock again, until the door opened a cautious crack. He looked surprised, almost ashamed, but he accepted the basket with both hands, as if holding something fragile. That was the moment a spark touched the dry wood of our indifference. The next day's whispers began to circulate. She had spoken to him. She had seen the leaks in his ceiling, the way rain slipped inside as though the roof had forgotten its purpose. She told us he was alone, no family to call, no children nearby, no savings that could match the crumbling needs of the house. The words she shared carried weight, heavier than gossip, closer to responsibility. For years, we had all stepped around his silence, pretending not to see the way vines claimed his windows. Now, her voice made it impossible to look away. It began with hesitation. People nodded, but did not commit. Everyone had their own worries, their own tiredness at the end of long weeks. Still, something lingered. A man down the street dropped off a bundle of wood. Another family cleared the front yard, pulling weeds until the path appeared again like a memory uncovered. Small gestures gathered like drops of rain, and before long, they formed a stream. Plans began to form in conversations over fences, in messages passed from one household to another. Could we repair a roof? Could we paint? Could we lift a house that had been falling for so long? The old man resisted at first. When they offered to help, his voice was low, almost embarrassed. He said he had managed this long. He didn't want to trouble anyone. But beneath the words was a tremor of longing, the quiet hope of someone afraid to ask too much. And so, the neighbor pressed his hand gently and told him it was no trouble at all, that a neighborhood is more than addresses it, is a circle that holds even those who cannot stand tall anymore. Slowly, he allowed us in, and what began as a single knock on his door was about to swell into something greater. The first morning of work felt uncertain, as though we were trespassing on his solitude. Yet when the hammers rose and the first old boards were pulled away, a rhythm settled in. Men climbed ladders with shingles under their arms. Women painted walls that had not felt color in decades, and children carried brushes as if they held torches of light. The air was filled with sounds we had never shared before: laughter, mixing with saws, the steady thud of nails sealing more than wood. What had been a lonely corner of the street turned into the heartbeat of the neighborhood. The old man stood at the edge of his porch. At first, his gaze was unsure, darting from one task to another, as though he could not believe what his eyes were giving him. He tried to offer directions, fumbling with apologies for the trouble. But each time someone told him gently that he had given enough in his years, and now it was his turn to receive. Slowly, his shoulders eased, and a lightness came over him that no one had seen before. The silence that had clung to his yard for so long was replaced by voices calling his name. Days passed, and the house began to change. The roof stood firm again, ready to shelter him from storms. The porch, once sagging, now stretched strong beneath fresh wood. Walls gleamed with new paint, bright against the backdrop of sky. The yard bloomed with flowers planted by the children, each one insisting that color should return where it had once been swallowed by gray. The house was no longer a husk of forgotten years. It was alive, breathing again. On the final evening, when the tools were set down and the sun slipped low, neighbors gathered on the very porch they had rebuilt. He sat among them, not behind a curtain but in the center. He looked less like a man lost in time and more like a grandfather surrounded by family. His words came halting but full, thanking each of us. Though what filled the air was more than thanks, it was a recognition that none of us were strangers anymore. The house stood renewed, but what had been rebuilt was larger than wood and paint. We had repaired the bridge between us, rediscovered that unity is not a gesture but a lifeline, and as the night settled, I realized we had not just given him a home back, we had returned him to the circle of belonging, and in doing so, found our own place within it. If this story touched you, take a moment to like, share, and leave your thoughts below. And if you want more stories that warm the heart and stir reflection, don't forget to subscribe and join us here at the Tales We Share.